Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for my rational perspective on Southampton 1, Chelsea 1. Chelsea's winning run under Thomas Tuchel in the Premier League is over, at least for now, and hopefully we'll be able to build another one up. But it's a frustrating game, I think it is, for a number of reasons. I think, as Glenn Hoddle on commentary put it very right, I think in the end, it was a nearly performance. There was only moments where Chelsea in the first and second half built things up in terms of attack from deep, where you felt like something's going to ignite here. It felt like there was the potential for that today, but it just never happened. And I think today, 2 points for me of where Thomas Tuchel really has to work hard to, I think, root out some fundamental problems from Chelsea for a number of years. And it's going to be a big job for him. Now, he may not be able to solve all of the problems for this season. He may have to go to the summer and hopefully fix maybe some of these problems with some new players to bring in. Two key problems today that have been prevalent with Chelsea for a number of years, right? If you've been watching Chelsea closely, you know these two issues, right? Chelsea having a lot of the ball, dominating it, not creating a ton of opportunities, but being done with one pass. That has been a prevalent issue at Chelsea for a number of years. And that is something that I think is so frustrating and irritating, but you can't expect Thomas Tuchel to work miracles in about, not even 4 weeks, not even a month he's been at Chelsea yet, coming close to that. But he's done a lot of good work so far, but that's something still within this team that you fear, and you can't trust this team currently to always go out there and put in a clinical performance. I think there's been a lot to like so far about Thomas Tuchel and the way he set up Chelsea to efficiently and professionally get the job done, I think, in a number of situations. But today, when we came up against an opponent, and this is what I've been saying all week going up to the Southampton game, where a different type of opposition, yes, one that weren't as progressive as we expected, but still is going to harass you, has the energy to keep up with you, is going to press you from midfield, especially get more bodies into midfield, is going to challenge you in different ways. That's an issue for Chelsea to sort of solve. I think if we're coming up against a team who are going to sit deep like teams have recently, you think about the likes of Newcastle, Burnley, not proactive in their press. Chelsea had a lot of the ball. The likes of Mateo Kovacic were able to get into the game. But when you don't have that space, when you don't have that time, it does become a little bit more difficult. And Chelsea need to have that clinical edge on the final third. And that's the second point. Number one is defensive lapses at key moments that cost us. Number two is having ruthless finishing, which we haven't had for a number of years. I don't expect Chelsea to have 5, 10, 15 clear opportunities every game. You can't expect that. Some days when you come up against a really well organised team like Southampton, who despite having really poor results recently, Ralph Hasenhuttl was a really good coach, really competent coach, knows how to set up a well-oiled team like Southampton. As we saw earlier in the season against us, there's a reason they've been quite good this year, and they were set up well to counteract us. And unfortunately, this Chelsea team isn't prolific enough when we get a small number of opportunities to finish them off. I think there are several members of this squad that I can see becoming players that are much more ruthless in the final third. Maybe some of that is like fitness, like Kai Havertz we hope in the coming years, maybe Timo Werner, maybe Hakim Ziyech, Callum Hudson-Odoi. I think really it was Mason Mount creatively today. He's the reason Chelsea get a point from St Mary's. If it wasn't for Mason Mount getting the penalty, scoring the penalty, even himself in open play, trying to make things happen on his own, Chelsea didn't look that inventive really from anyone else. And that's a shame, it really is. And I think there were several reasons we can get into that, right? And as I say, I don't think all of it can be solved by Tuchel, even within the next 3 or 4 months for the rest of the season. But I think that for now, I think we have to look at those things and say there is a lot of work to be done if Chelsea want to be serious title challengers and move on next season to a next level, which I think, as I think we knew this already, but I think it just gives you sort of that further understanding of the problems at Chelsea currently. And I don't want to sort of stress that this is some sort of dire, awful performance. I think it's a nearly performance. And earlier in the season, going away to Southampton before they had this 6-game losing streak, I think you would have been pleased with a point at St Mary's. You would have been content. It's a difficult ground to go to. But unfortunately, Chelsea do have a knack recently of really helping teams in poor form. We didn't lose today, which I think is a positive in a sense of Chelsea. I've seen Chelsea teams in previous times have moments like that. We've been really dominant in a game. We concede 1 goal and we collapse. Luckily, mentally, that did not happen today. But it still is frustrating that Chelsea couldn't make it 5 wins in a row we couldn't go into that Atletico Madrid game with more confidence and beat a team that I think would have been a bit of a hurdle for Thomas Tuchel's side. Unfortunately, it is just a point. So in that team, as we see here, Mendy, Dave, Rudiger, Zuma, James, Kova, Kante, Alonso, Mount, Abraham and Timo Werner. The biggest things to stand out in that starting 11 were Kurt Zouma and N'Golo Kante, both making their first Premier League starts for Thomas Tuchel. I think to varying levels of success. I think Kurt Zouma, we have to look at the goal. We have to think about his positioning for that goal. I don't see Kurt, for me personally, as the centre of a back three. Defensively, Chelsea weren't bad today, I have to say. I think Chelsea did really well to stop Southampton countering on us, which has been Chelsea being done on transition has been a big problem. But I think there is another reason to that I'll get into, which I think is the positive of Tuchel's decision-making in terms of team selection today. But Zuma in the middle of a back three, I think his passing is criminally underrated, but I think for what that position requires, I just still see Kurt, maybe because he's been in the back two successfully before, maybe because of his recovery tackles, I just still see him as maybe a left or right centre-back in a back three, or just in a back four where he's flourished earlier in the season for Chelsea alongside Thiago Silva. I just wonder that lack of communication there at a key moment between him, Dave and Rudiger really cost Chelsea. You saw him looking one way. Minamino made a really smart run and it was a great pass through, and Kovacic being pulled out of position, and it was that one moment, and unfortunately Chelsea were punished for it in truth. And Southampton didn't create a lot of in open play today, which was good from a Chelsea defensive standpoint, but it's that one moment, that one lapse in concentration that cost Chelsea dearly, really in the end, because we didn't have enough creativity or potency at the other end to create enough opportunities to score more than one goal. So that's the issue right there. I think on the other end of the spectrum, as I'm going to explain now, defensively, which really helped us solidly in the middle of the park, was N'Golo Kante, who was incredible today, especially in that first half. It felt like I was transported back to 16-17 under Antonio Conte, that N'Golo Kante. Even N'Golo Kante we've seen earlier in the season, when he was playing really well as that lone DM. But Kante was back to his best in this double six alongside Mateo Kovacic. It seemed like, at least in earlier periods of the game, they had that understanding of where to be. Actually, if you looked at average positions, Kante was much further up on the right side, and Kova was almost playing a role you'd assume Jorginho would play in this team, much deeper, close to the back three, trying to pick up the ball from deep and progress it from there. But Kante was everywhere. Those interceptions, that tenacity, that energy, ball winning, the tackling today was absolutely mesmerising at times. It really was. And it helped Chelsea stop Southampton trying to counter on us. And I think a fit raring to go N'Golo Kante changes this midfield massively, and it gives me so much hope moving forward that Kante now can get back to his best levels with Thomas Tuchel, because Tuchel constantly praises Kante, and you can see why. We know why. Kante is a world-class footballer, but so many questions about his fitness, about where he stands currently with Chelsea. Does he want to be here next season? To me, that looked like a player getting back to his best levels. So I think it was wonderful seeing Kante where he was today and how he was today, because that was the best N'Golo Kante. That is N'Golo Kante at his best, and when he's like that, it's a game changer for Chelsea. Unfortunately, his brilliant work in winning us back the ball didn't lead to the attackers in front of him being good enough in the final third to create those opportunities and score more goals. So that's a shame. But Kante, especially going into a massive game against Atletico Madrid on Tuesday, for me, he has to be starting that game, in my opinion, because at that level, he can change the game for Chelsea and win the battle in the middle of the park, which is so key. But yeah, that goal, as I said, Kurt Zouma, his positioning, but then I have to give praise to Tuchel once again, because he's progressive, he's proactive. I think we all knew his demeanour going into half-time. We knew he was going to make changes. It was just about how many. Where was he going to make those changes? Tammy Abraham coming off for Callum Hudson-Odoi, which is a big sort of narrative later on in the game, as we'll get to. Tammy, I don't know if it's a fitness problem, because he had ice over his ankle. So was he really fit to play this game? That's a big question. But he unfortunately was completely isolated in that first half. And it was the same really in the second half when Timo Werner went central and Callum was on the right, Mason was on the left. But Mason, as we know in this system, doesn't really play as a winger. He plays much more as sort of a number 10, a roaming number 10. In behind those sort of two central strikers, or at least a little bit retracted, which helps him really get influence in the game. And Mason Mount's the reason Chelsea have a point today. Don't get it twisted. For me, he is the man of the match. He wins a penalty early on. A typical striker foul from Danny Ings in the box. Such smart movement from Mason there. There was a moment there just before he wins that penalty where he could easily have sort of played the safe pass back, but instead he goes into the box, makes Danny Ings make a difficult decision. He wins the penalty, steps up himself and finishes it coolly. I think the first Englishman to score a penalty for Chelsea in the Premier League since Frank Lampard in 2013. And Mason all round was creating things. He wins a free kick, which Marcos Alonso should have done a lot better with. I just want to touch on Marcos Alonso. I think he was really poor today. There seems to be no sort of middle ground for Marcos Alonso, as Joe Tweedy, a friend of the channel, stated on Twitter, where it's either really bad or he scores a worldy goal, and we're all praising him for that. I just don't think there were so many moments in that first half and second half where his lack of mobility and energy and acceleration in the final third really cost Chelsea. And that's for me why I think in the long term, Ben Chilwell will be back in this side, because I think all-round Ben Chilwell is a better player. And I think all-round Ben Chilwell offers you more. Marcos Alonso does have that incredible goal threat in a 3-4-3, right? But I think today his performance all-round was just really poor. And I think with Callum Hudson-Odoi being sort of sub late on, I think he can feel a little bit hard done by, because for me, if there was one player on that pitch, especially at half time, the number one contender to be subbed for me was Marcos Alonso. I think his all-round performance today, just poor, just mobility, breaking down in the final third where he should be a lot more stronger. I think there's just, you saw the limitations of his game today, and I think that is something that Tuchel needs to look at in the long term, because I think against more dynamic opposition, against opposition who aren't just going to sit back and allow Chelsea lots of space, there needs to be that consideration for Marcos Alonso. I just think all round, I just don't think it's clearly just not a set thing if you put him at left wing back and he turns into a world-class player, because today he was really poor in my opinion in terms of his performance levels. But yeah, we just lack that invention, and I think I need to come to the next big thing I can't go throughout this video without talking about, and I did delay my recording just to see what Thomas Tuchel said about Callum Hudson-Odoi. It wasn't an injury, really surprising. So he comes off for Hakim Ziyech. Jorginho comes on for Kovacic for those remaining minutes. Big chance for Ziyech, which unfortunately he couldn't really get involved in the game. But in the case of Hudson-Odoi, I quite like the decision. I like the ruthlessness of it. I like the statement it sends to every single player in this squad that even if you come off the bench, don't think you're safe. Don't think you're just guaranteed minutes. No one is guaranteed minutes. And it shows you the depth to this squad that Tuchel has. He knows he has. The reintegrating of players recently, I think, shows you the pragmatism in Tuchel. And it also shows you a coach that just isn't going to accept second best. He isn't going to accept mediocrity on the pitch. And I'm not having a go at Callum, who has been really good recently. And he's got such a bright future at Chelsea, don't get me wrong. But I think just the statement it sends of today for me is that if you're not up to the right standards for me, you're going to be taken off. And I think it says a lot about Tuchel, what he sees from this team, where he wants to take this team. Hopefully, Callum just takes it in the right way, is motivated to get back to his best levels, which he's been at recently. He's got back into the team, but I think it shows you there'll be no favoritism in this team. If you want to be in this team, you have to play well. You have to actually impact the game, which unfortunately a lot of players didn't today, especially in the final third. So those are my thoughts on the game. As I say, I think in the end it's a bit of a forgettable game. Chelsea now move on to Atletico Madrid on Tuesday, which is a massive, massive test. It really is. And as I said, certain parts of today's game, hopefully the likes of Thiago Silva will be back in the starting 11 on Tuesday, in the middle of the back three, hopefully alongside Rudiger and Dave. There were things that you could see coming together with this performance where you think, if we add certain things, and some of these things I don't think can be added in the next 3 or 4 months. I think some of them will have to be rectified in the summer. I'm thinking about a ruthless finisher in the final third, which it seems at the moment we just don't have, unfortunately. So that's something Tuchel has to address if Chelsea, as I say, want to move from a team challenging for top 4 to the higher echelons of the Premier League once again and be competing for a Premier League title, which is what this team and what Tuchel knows, the demand of him. He has to be in the Premier League title race next season, and if Chelsea continue having these same issues, we're not going to be good enough to be in that. But those are my thoughts on the game. Let me know yours in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and a notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter @SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again.